underserved API communities to build more just and equitable society. What's pretty exciting is that AAPIP Chicago was the first chapter in the Midwest. And then in 2002 is when we established our sister organization, the Asiangiving Circle, that you will hear more about later in this webinar. AAPIP Chicago has about 30 members representing local foundations and nonprofit organizations. And the chapter is chaired by Shandalee Griffith, who will be fielding questions throughout the day today, and then our amazing steering committee who put together this webinar. And so we're just going to provide really briefly some context around this webinar and everything that's been going on as it relates to COVID-19. And so in March, in response to the coronavirus pandemic, AAPIP Chicago teamed up with our local philanthropy affinity groups to put out a joint statement. And we asked our peers to do 4 things: remain diligent and end the spread of misinformation, implement practices that advance equity and trust, and advocate for the safety of all communities, and lean into discomfort as you make challenging and important decisions. And so a few weeks ago, to follow up on this joint statement, AAPIP Chicago followed up with our members with a call to action. And so what we did is we shared a working list of COVID-19 community and government resources for Chicagoans. And we also shared an invitation to sign AAPIP National's open letter to philanthropy. And so we will share this link, or Shandalee will share this link in the group chat now to this listserv here that you're looking at. It's on Airtable. And please email me directly if you have any recommendations or additional resources to add. And so again, the joint statement and the list of resources that we shared has really brought us here together today for this webinar. Again, you will be hearing from COVID-19 Response Fund and grant-making program representatives for local nonprofits. Each guest speaker will provide a brief overview of the Response Fund or grant-making program, walk us through the application timeline, share tips on how to complete an aligned application, and then share any highlights of recipients or impacts of the funding. We ask that throughout, obviously you keep yourself muted, and then we will open it up for questions after all of the presentations. And so we encourage you throughout to send your questions to the group chat, and then we'll help moderate those at the end. And also too, we'll be introducing each guest speaker with their contact information, and then we'll also be providing the same information at the end too, so you don't have to feel like you need to be scribbling things down throughout the presentation. And so without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Clarita, who's going to talk to us about the Illinois COVID-19 Response Fund.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Clarita Santos. I'm Executive Director of Corporate Service Partnerships for Healthcare Service Corporation. A little bit about myself. I'm actually first-generation Filipino-American. My family came to the United States through the U.S. Navy. My dad was actually a veteran, and he was actually stationed in California, so that's why I'm a California baby. But actually now I consider myself a Chicagoan. I've been in Chicago since 1994. Graduate school brought me here. I love Chicago, and so Chicago is my forever home, so I'm glad to be here. In terms of my background is actually in public health. And so the way I look at health is through an health equity, health disparities lens. One of my first jobs here is I worked with Asian American AIDS Services. I was actually an HIV AIDS educator working with the Asian American community. So my role was really thinking about how do we think about healthcare issues within the Asian American community as a case manager. So I share that with you because I bring that perspective in the work that I do now. I currently also do community investments for Healthcare Service Corporation. So part of my role with that has enabled our organization to be part of the Illinois COVID-19 Response Fund. So we are one of the partners of the Illinois COVID Response Fund. So my role within that fund is I'm part of the work group, and the work group is there to think through, you can give some of the recommendations, think about working with the Illinois Department of Public Health to understand where the COVID-19 disease is headed, that type of things, but also to give feedback from the community regarding what are some of the experiences that the community is experiencing. So I'm here to kind of answer questions or just share with you what the Illinois COVID-19 Fund has been doing and what will it be doing, and some potential opportunities for Asian American organizations to be able to get some of that funding. So Jay, do you mind if we kind of pull up the home page of the COVID Fund? So just a brief background, there's been 2 rounds of funding. So first of all, the focus around the funding is really around response, and the way they're defining response is immediate needs. So organizations that have a history of giving support from, rental assistance, food, shelter, really, financial assistance. That's what's really the focus of this fund is. So the first round, they had given it to mainly the larger organizations, thinking about the larger organizations would then be able to partner with smaller organizations and then disperse the fund. So at a high level, the way they're thinking through that is working with the United Ways, right? And also with the community foundations to be able to disperse the funding. So as you can see here, there's a mix of foundations, United Ways, and then the larger direct service organization. So one of the questions we had as a group was to kind of understand where has the funding gone now, right? Because it's been a pretty quick turnaround time, and part of that because it is a response grant, so they wanted to get the dollars quickly because folks are, experiencing need now. So where we are now is we're looking to do a round 3, and part of the issue is figuring out how do we get all the requests, but at the same time, there's a team of 12 of us to kind of figure out how we disperse the funding. So one recommendation I would suggest would be, and I'm sure who's on the call, it's a mix of direct service organizations and foundations, I'm assuming, Jay, is that right?
That's correct.
So I would say one would be, if you don't have a relationship with your local United Way, to develop that relationship. That's one way. That's one way in. The other way is maybe sharing information with me regarding if you are doing services in those areas, particularly outside of Cook County. That would be very helpful because the fund right now is focused on areas outside of Cook County because of the Chicago COVID-19 is focused on, Chicago neighborhoods in Cook County. So this one is particularly focused on outside of Cook County. So again, if you have experience in those areas in providing, direct service in, rental assistance, financial assistance, food, those type of things, those are the type of services that this fund is looking to support. So I'm going to stop there to see if there are any questions.
And we'll loop back, Clarita, at the end to do those questions. So if you have any, send them to the group chat and just hold on to them for a few other minutes. Thanks so much, Clarita. Anything else?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks again, Clarita. So now we're going to hear about the Technology Funders Collaborative from Michael at Crossroads Fund. Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Happy Friday, but also more importantly, happy May Day. May Day is in honor of the Haymarket Affair and the workers who fought for an 8-hour workday. I think there's a lot of digital actions happening right now. I think ICER, as well as a lot of other workers' rights groups, are planning some things today in honor of that workers' struggle. So yeah. So my name is Michael with Crossroads Fund. I'm the program director there. Previously was the ED at a Fire, which was a community organizing group based in Albany Park that was working with Filipino immigrants and domestic workers on immigrant rights and workers' rights, and have been a proud recipient of Asiangiving Circle grants in the past. So in many shoes similar as yours. like Clarita, I have found Chicago my home. I grew up actually in Texas, but was born in Chicago, and moved here about 7 years ago. I'm happy to call this home and a proud Chicagoan now. I think I'll go on from there to talk about the Technology Collaborative Fund. So this is a fund that was pooled from a lot of different Chicago foundations that support community organizing. We have seen in the past month and a half, how the growing digital divide has really exacerbated challenges in communities. We've also seen how organizing, which is very relational, which is very face-to-face, which is about building trust, really is difficult when you're doing it through the phone or through Zoom. And so this fund and collaborative pot of money is to support those organizations who are trying to think about how to be innovative in this time of COVID and pandemic. And that third bullet point there, it's really how to support innovative organizing strategy to really look at what the root cause is, right? Like the statistics we've all seen in the news, the virus is hitting Black and brown communities hardest. It's hitting areas with low income folks who don't have access to the same kind of resources or support networks. And also there has been over policing, right? We've been hearing from our grantees about police on the west side of Chicago who are doing checkpoints for access and asking for our identification. Whereas in parts of the north side and in more of the affluent parts, there's no police, right? There's folks in the parks on a sunny day, there's folks walking around. And so how to address that disparity and how to call out and show the disparate treatment. For Asian American community, obviously, addressing anti-Asian sentiment in light of COVID. So thinking about what does organizing look like to create those counter narratives about what does it mean to be in solidarity with different parts of the city that are predominantly Asian American and different communities. So that was kind of the purpose and the beginning part of this fund. And Jay, if we could go to the next slide. So the foundations that came together are 9 foundations so far. We have Albert Pick, Comer, Conant, Crossroads Fund, Field Foundation, McCormick, Polk, Woods Fund, and Weebolt. And I mentioned these because one of the main criterias to apply for this fund is to be one of the grantees of one of these organizations. So a grantee within the last 3 years of any one or all of these foundations, if you're lucky enough to have all of those. But it's really to support existing grantees as they're building out and trying to think of those organizing strategies. This isn't necessarily for groups who want to start organizing right now. It's more for folks who have been doing it, have a record of work, and have a deep relationship with their foundation. Next slide. Thank you. So again, for community organizing groups, have been funded by one of the 9 organizations on the previous slide, and then within the last 3 years. I'll also share a little bit about some of the things that we've been seeing so far in terms of example requests. So the next slide, please, Jay. So this can look a lot very differently for your organization, but on a baseline, it's how to build out your organizational capacity or your digital infrastructure to respond to this moment. You know, that can look very different. It's sometimes hardware, software needs, other times it's network, access to internet in different parts of the city is very challenging, but also digital meeting, right? Zoom costs a certain amount each month, as well as trainings for your staff or your community to be able to access these things as you're trying to engage them. Just to give you an example of what we've seen so far from our first round of approvals, things have gone towards Wi-Fi hotspots to be able to stay in contact with folks in the community. There have also been mass texting services that are subscription-based that people are utilizing. They're also doing staff trainings on digital organizing techniques, even a training on graphic design, right? Like graphic design is really important in this moment of social media, and needing those services and training about how to do graphic design is something that this fund will fund. I'll also share that it's already gone through the first round of approvals. There will be a second round, but it's going to be a smaller amount. So what was approved in the first round was about 100,000. In the second round, we're anticipating about 50,000 to give out again. To share with you, in the first round, the only directly serving Asian American group was Arab American Action Network. And so I think there is an opportunity for Asian American serving groups in the city to apply. Also, some things they're looking for that aren't necessarily in the criteria in terms of evaluating proposals and evaluating who should be funded. Obviously, meeting the basic qualifications, like being a grantee of those foundations, doing community organizing. But what they're also looking at is, where are you in the city? Are you filling a gap where they haven't funded already? What are the demographics of the group you're serving? Like, has this community been missed by some of the larger pots? And so how to fill those gaps. Also looking at who's leading the organization. Is it Asian American led? Is it POC led? So those are some important things that they're looking for on the back end. I think that might be it on my end. I don't think there's another slide. No? Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael, so much. All right, and so now we're going to hear from Asiangiving Circle. And just to clarify, this is a grant-making program. You obviously hear more in detail, but it specifically serves nonprofits that are serving or impacting and supporting the API communities locally, versus the first two response funds you heard about were specifically around COVID-19. So I will turn it over to Eric now.
Thanks, and good morning, everyone. And I was pleased to hear that the other two folks are also non-native Chicagoans that have now called Chicago home. I'm originally from North Carolina, and my southern self has adapted myself to 10 years of winter, so I'm proud to call Chicago home. My background, I came from the corporate sector. I spent about 12 plus years, or 15 plus years in consulting and also doing corporate strategy and sales operations, and I found Asiangiving Circle through a couple of my friends on that, and really got involved, and now kind of got convinced to become more involved as the co-chair. So just to give you a little background, and I see a lot of familiar faces and names on the Zoom call as well, but Asiangiving Circle is a donor-advised fund of the Chicago Community Trust, and we bring together professionals throughout Chicago to kind of leverage the impact of issues on common concern within the Asian American community. So for folks that don't know what donor advised fund it is, the Chicago Community Trust essentially handles all the administrative end on there. So then we go out and fundraise through our networks, spreading out to on there. I can definitely say from my standpoint, as someone that was not very actively involved until about 5 years ago, I was not aware of what was kind of going on. So for me personally, it's ideas like, how do we expand beyond just a nonprofit Asian community and expand our reach out to other folks that may not know what we're doing. Because I think it's a wonderful thing. As talked about earlier, like AGC is the first volunteer managed giving circle focused on AAPI donors in the US. And we just passed our 15th year in 2019 of giving grants. Just as a structure, our members commit to donating a minimum of $250 a year for at least 2 years, and we have had a $125 a year for the emerging philanthropists. And some of our members also, like myself and a couple of other folks on this call, choose to get more involved in our process through being involved in our grant-making committee. So these AGC members on the committee will make site visits, interview staff, and evaluate the grant requests. Just to kind of, as mentioned, kind of like we're funding local AAPI initiatives. What we typically fund is we continue our commitment to support community-based efforts to protect oppressed and marginalized communities and advance justice for all. Our grant ranges typically are around 2,000 to 8,000. Particularly for this year, we focused our projects on community organizing, civic engagement, and healing, which would encompass things like mental health. The organizations that we fund are metropolitan Chicago area organizations that serve Asian Americans. They're eligible to apply. We give priority to programs and initiatives with budgets smaller than 150K, but a program or initiative may be part of a large organization that has a budget over that if the budget of that program is less than 150. We have definitely encouraged organizations that have not typically engaged in community organizing, civic engagement, healing, to think creatively how these strategies can further advance their missions. And the organization's eligibility requires hinges on their 501c3 status. They can be fiscally sponsored as well. They do have to serve and engage Asian American Pacific Islander communities in the Chicago metropolitan area. And just to kind of give you an idea of how we've kind of shifted. So our normal process in the past was that we would have an RFP put out in like roughly the April timeframe, and we would have applicants apply and apply by a June deadline so that we could disperse funds like in the August, September timeframe. And in the midst of that, normally we would have review meetings that kind of go through and do site visits, as I mentioned, and then send it out to vote with the AGC member base. Because of COVID-19, kind of our response to this year is like right before kind of the stay-at-home order happened, we sent out an email asking our past grantees and prospective grantees is that how AGC could be supportive of them, particularly in this time. So we offered if we could extend the deadline for our letter of intent, which we had this year, as well as offering an early disbursement. So a lot of organizations came back and said, hey, we wouldn't mind having an extension of that LOI as well as an earlier disbursement. And then because we're working also with the trusts on there, we have to also kind of make sure we meet kind of their standards. So we were able to work with the trust to help reduce the administrative this work for applying. So this year we actually only required an LOI, especially the organizations that previously applied, so they don't actually have to go to Grant Central to apply. And we shifted our site visits to emails and phone calls. So we were able to push up our grant making cycle. So actually currently in it, we only have one round. So we currently went through our first review process and we're going through some kind of final vetting of that. So our deadline actually just passed in April to apply for that. And a lot of the shift this year, so as a community organization, we're also about trying to understand what the community wants. So we did community survey and listening sessions under like how we can improve each year as AGC. If I give kind of an example, as I mentioned, like that range of type of initiatives we fund can be pretty broad, and it can cover a lot of different things. But I think the one thing I've been pleasantly surprised, and probably not surprised, but pleasantly saw that a lot of our grantees have now adapted to, hey, if some of these programs they've done in the past, like we've actually had, and last year, if I remember correctly, we had storytelling initiatives for healing, as well as youth leadership programs for engaging high school students to explore about mental health in online spaces. So a lot of these organizations have adapted their LOI responses to how am I engaged in this very different environment. So whether it's having a summit online, how to deliver content online, but how to keep people engaged in the same way, how do I organize online? So for me, that's definitely been one thing I've definitely seen is like, it's very cool to be able to see the organizations and grantees who support adapt to that and allow us also well to kind of serve them in that manner. So I think that's all for me.
Great, thank you so much, Eric. And we will move on to the next section. Before we open it up for Q&A, again, we'll be looking back to the group chat. I don't see too many there. And then, you know, depending on, just because our group is so small, we also might just call in some folks too. So I'll turn it over to Chandali now. And thanks again to all of our speakers, and we'll start answering your questions.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to say special thanks to everybody who shared their great, valuable information for the community. I just posted also, if you want to copy and paste in the chat, their websites for the information on details with programming and guidelines, and also their email addresses. So you can feel free to copy and paste there. If you have any questions, just feel free to either let me know in chat and then I can unmute you. But this is really very useful, and we really want to also make sure that you guys check out the Airtable with the list of the resources that we continue to collect from all of our networks across the city and the state. So that's a great, valuable resource that I would check every now and then as well, but we'll continue to share newsletters through AAPIP Chicago Chapter 2. But thank you for joining the call. Any questions or comments, or if you know of any funds that we should share with our community, that'd be great. So before we wrap, if nobody has any questions, we wanted to share with you also that we will be doing a series of webinars in the month of May. Not only is it May Day, we also have Asian Heritage Month. So this is a great, exciting moment for us to celebrate our heritage. And what we plan to do actually 2 weeks from today on May 15th is have another webinar, which will share more specifics with everybody. Our membership, and feel free to share with your networks as well to join us for a second webinar. And I'll let Jay wrap it up as well too, or go ahead.
Could I just say one thing? I'm sorry if you guys were looking at my chin. As I was speaking, I just figured out how to see myself. So thank you for your patience. And I apologize for my chin.
Thanks, Clarita. No worries at all. We're all in the Zoom space now these days. So the only thing I would add about our next webinar, so AAPIP Chicago, again, you know, this is our first webinar. We're excited to host our next on May 15th. More broadly, the topic will be about anti-Asian racism in light of celebrating Asian American Heritage Month. So look out for more information there. Thanks to everyone who joined us here today. We hope you found this helpful. And again, please share, you know, future webinars that you think would be helpful to your communities and partners with them. They're more than welcome to join. So as you can see, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, this is just a list and a reminder of all the speakers and their contact information. Please feel free to reach out. I hope those on the call and your partners take advantage of some of these grant-making opportunities. And that is all we have for you today. So thanks again, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their Friday. Happy May Day, and have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.